Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive alien ship through the bridge windows of the UES Frontier. The vessel was 3 times larger than his exploration ship and gleamed like polished silver against the black space. Strange blue lights pulsed along its hull in patterns that hurt his eyes to watch. "Sir, they're sending another transmission," said Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez from the communications station. His voice cracked slightly. 3 days ago, Sam had been excited about finding new planets. Now he looked pale and nervous. Jake nodded and straightened his uniform. "Put it through, Sam." The main screen flickered and showed an alien face that made several crew members gasp. The creature had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated skull. Its skin was deep purple and covered in scales that shifted color when it moved. When it spoke, its voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "I am Admiral Zethkar of the Valkyrian Empire, speaking for the Galactic Coalition. You humans have entered space that belongs to civilized beings. State your purpose here." Jake stepped forward, trying to look confident. "I'm Captain Morrison, of the United Earthship Frontier. We're on a peaceful exploration mission. We didn't know this area was claimed by anyone." The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "Ignorance is not an excuse. Your species has been expanding rapidly into Coalition space. This cannot continue. We're willing to talk about boundaries and agreements," Jake said. "Earth wants peaceful relations with all spacefaring civilizations." Admiral Zethkar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species is young and crude. You fight with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. Your ships are built like weapons instead of works of art. You have no understanding of honorable combat." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The alien's tone reminded him of a teacher scolding a child. "What do you mean by honorable combat?" "For 10,000 years, the Coalition has maintained peace through the sacred codes of warfare. When disputes arise, we settle them properly. Ships duel with energy weapons at respectful distances. Ground forces march in formation with banners flying. Victory goes to the superior civilization, not to those who use tricks and deception." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Jake stared at the blank screen, processing what he had heard. The aliens seemed to think there were rules for fighting wars, like some kind of cosmic sports league. "Captain," said Dr. Lisa Kane, the ship's xenobiologist. She had been quiet during the exchange, but now her face showed concern. "I've been analyzing their ship's movements and energy patterns. They're incredibly advanced, but there's something strange about their behavior." "What do you mean?" "They've been broadcasting their position constantly. They're not hiding at all. In fact, they seem to want us to know exactly where they are and what they're doing. That's not how you act if you're planning an attack." Jake nodded slowly. "They're following their own rules, even when talking to strangers?" "It gets stranger," Lisa continued. "I've been studying the video transmission. Look at the background behind the Admiral." She replayed the conversation on a side screen. Jake could see past the alien's shoulder into what looked like the bridge of their ship. Everything was arranged in perfect symmetry. Control stations formed neat rows, and crew members stood at attention in matching uniforms. Even the lighting was carefully balanced. "Their whole ship is organized like a parade ground," Lisa observed. "This isn't a military vessel designed for combat efficiency. It's designed to look impressive." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. These aliens had ruled space for thousands of years, but they seemed to care more about appearances than practical fighting. That could be dangerous in ways the Admiral didn't understand. "Sir," Sam called from his station, "I'm receiving a data burst from Earth Command. They want all information about this contact immediately." Jake wasn't surprised. First contact with an alien civilization was the most important event in human history. Every word of the conversation would be analyzed by experts back on Earth. "Send everything, Sam. Include Dr. Kane's observations about their ship design and behavior patterns." Over the next several hours, Jake watched as more Coalition ships arrived. Each vessel was unique in design, but shared the same artistic sensibility. They looked like sculptures that happened to fly through space rather than practical military hardware. The ships arranged themselves in a perfect formation, spacing themselves at exact intervals. "They're beautiful," whispered Kate Williams. "The ship's pilot, but they're sitting ducks. No random movement, no defensive positioning. They're just floating there in a pattern." Jake had been thinking the same thing. In Earth's military academies, the first rule of space combat was never to be predictable. These aliens seem to have built their entire civilization around being as predictable as possible. Dr. Kane approached his command chair. "Captain, I've been thinking about what the Admiral said. He mentioned that humans fight with explosives and projectiles, and he seemed disgusted by it, but those are effective weapons. Why would an advanced civilization abandon effective weapons? For less practical ones? Maybe they never had to fight a real war," Jake suggested. "If everyone follows the same rules, you never need to think outside the box." "That's what worries me," Lisa said quietly. "What happens when they meet someone who doesn't follow their rules?" Before Jake could answer, Sam announced another incoming transmission. This time, the screen showed a different alien. This one looked like a giant insect with multiple arms and compound eyes that reflected the bridge lights like mirrors. "I am Hive Mind Coordinator Vrex of the Vexani Collective. The Coalition Council has reviewed your species' files. We have studied your primitive wars and chaotic fighting methods. You are dangerous because you have no honor." Jake tried to stay calm. "We have honor. We just define it differently than you do. You use ambush tactics. You camouflage your warriors. You attack supply lines instead of engaging in proper battle. These are the actions of cowards and savages." "Those are the actions of soldiers trying to win," Jake replied. "War isn't a game with rules, it's about survival." The insect alien's mandibles clicked rapidly. "This is exactly why your species cannot be allowed to spread further. You would corrupt the galaxy with your barbaric methods? The Coalition offers you one choice: accept our guidance and learn civilized warfare, or be removed from space entirely." The transmission cut off again. Jake looked around his bridge at the worried faces of his crew. These aliens controlled most of the galaxy, and they had just delivered an ultimatum to humanity. "Sir," Sam said hesitantly, "Earth Command is ordering us to return immediately." "They're recalling all exploration ships," Jake nodded. "Set course for Earth Cape maximum speed." As the Frontier turned away from the Coalition fleet, Jake watched the alien ships on his rear display. They maintained their perfect formation, making no attempt to follow or intercept. They seemed confident that humanity would make the right choice when presented with Coalition superiority. Dr. Kane joined him at the observation window. "They don't understand us at all, do they?" "No," Jake agreed. "They think we're just another species that will fall in line once we see how powerful they are. They don't realize that humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We know every dirty trick in the book." "Is that good or bad?" Jake watched the alien ship shrink to points of light. "I guess we're about to find out. But I have a feeling the galaxy is going to learn something about humans that it won't like." The Frontier jumped to hyperspace, carrying news that would change everything. Behind them, the Coalition fleet continued its stately patrol, unaware that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They had given humanity time to prepare for war. General Roy Adams sat in the Pentagon briefing room, staring at the thick document that had arrived 3 days after Captain Morrison's return to Earth, the Codex of Honorable Combat. Was written in 17 different alien languages, each section more absurd than the last. "Listen to this," Roy said to the assembled military leaders. "Rule 47. All energy weapons must be fired from a minimum distance of 10,000 kilometers to allow enemy vessels time to respond with honor. Rule 62. Ground forces must announce their attack with ceremonial horns and allow the enemy to form proper battle lines." Admiral Ben Clark shook his head in disbelief. "They're giving us a playbook for how to beat them." "It gets worse," said Colonel Amy Torres, flipping through her copy. "They've banned night attacks, sneak attacks, attacking supply lines. and something called psychological warfare. They consider fear tactics dishonorable. Ambassador Helen Price had been trying to find diplomatic solutions for weeks, but the coalition refused to negotiate. The alien representatives would only discuss which human worlds would be surrendered, first as punishment for humanity's expansion into their territory. The Vexani delegate told me yesterday that humans are a virus that must be contained, Helen reported. They won't consider any agreement that lets us keep our current colonies. Dr. Lisa Kane pulled up holographic displays showing coalition fleet movements. I've been studying their battle recordings for the past month. Every single engagement follows the same pattern. Ships approach each other in straight lines, exchange fire at long range, and the damaged vessel withdraws to repair. Ground battles look like ancient Earth armies marching toward each other in formation. How do they handle multiple enemies? Asked Roy. They don't, Lisa replied. Their rules require single combat. When multiple ships are present, they fight one-on-one duels while the others wait their turn. I watched a recording where 8 coalition ships took turns fighting one rebel vessel instead of overwhelming it. Roy felt his tactical mind racing. These aliens had survived for thousands of years using methods that would have gotten them wiped out in any human war. They must have incredible technology to compensate for such poor strategy. What about their weapons and defenses? He asked. Colonel Torres activated another display. Their energy shields are impressive, but they're designed to stop other energy weapons. Our kinetic projectiles and explosive missiles aren't even considered real weapons in their database. Their computers don't know how to calculate defense against them. You're saying our primitive weapons might work better than their advanced ones? Against their current defenses, yes. But sir, they have numerical superiority. The coalition controls over 300 star systems. We have 12 colonies on Earth. Roy stood and walked to the star map showing coalition territory. Red zones marked enemy fleets, blue dots showed human settlements. The ratio was overwhelming, but something about the enemy positioning bothered him. Look at their fleet deployment, he said. Every ship group is arranged in perfect geometric patterns. They're not trying to hide or protect each other. They're showing off. Ambassador Price joined him at the map. The coalition views military displays as art forms. Their ships are built to be beautiful rather than functional. Their formations are designed to look impressive, not to be tactically sound. What if we pretend to accept their rules? Roy asked suddenly. Fight a few battles by their standards, let them think they understand us, while we prepare for real warfare? The room fell silent. What Roy was suggesting bordered on treachery by coalition standards, but it might be humanity's only chance for survival. Dr. Kane spoke first. The moral implications aside, it could work. Their psychology profiles show extreme overconfidence. They expect other species to submit after seeing coalition superiority. If we appear to be following their rules while secretly gathering intelligence, we sacrifice some battles to win the war, Roy finished. It's not pretty, but neither is extinction. Admiral Clark looked uncomfortable. We'd be sending people to die in rigged fights. We'd be sending people to die anyway if we fight them conventionally, Roy replied. At least this way, those deaths serve a purpose. Over the next week, Roy worked with a select team to develop what they privately called the Deception Protocol. Publicly, Earth would accept the coalition's terms and agree to settle disputes through honorable combat. Privately, human forces would use every fight to gather data about alien technology and tactics. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez volunteered for the first reconnaissance mission. His job was to lose a space battle while recording everything about coalition: weapons, shields, and crew psychology. The young officer understood he was unlikely to survive, but he also understood what was at stake. Remember, Roy told him during the final briefing, follow their rules exactly, but keep your sensors recording. We need to know how they think, how they react, what makes them confident or nervous. Pilot Kate Williams would command a small destroyer in the first honorable battle. Her ship was loaded with recording equipment disguised as standard systems. Like Sam, She knew the odds were against survival. What if we actually win following their rules? Kate asked. Then we learn something else valuable, Roy replied. But don't count on it. They've been refining this type of combat for millennia. The Coalition's response to humanity's acceptance was immediate and predictable. Admiral Zethkar himself would oversee the first battle to ensure humans understood proper fighting methods. The location would be the Kepler system, where human colonists had built mining stations on several asteroids. General Adams reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. Coalition psychology suggested they would be relaxed and overconfident, expecting an easy victory against primitive humans. Their ships would approach in standard formation, announce their intentions, and wait for human vessels to arrange themselves for single combat. What they wouldn't expect was that every human ship contained advanced recording equipment designed to analyze alien technology. Every conversation would be monitored, every energy signature measured, every tactical decision documented. Colonel Torres had identified the key weakness in coalition thinking. They assumed all enemies would fight the same way they did. They had no contingency plans for deception because their honor codes made such tactics unthinkable. The moment they realize we've been lying to them, this becomes a different kind of war, Roy warned his team. They'll be angry and confused, but they'll still have superior numbers and technology. We need to be ready for that transition. Dr. Kane had been studying human military history for lessons that might apply to fighting the coalition. Every successful revolution in human history used similar tactics, she observed. The American Revolution, guerrilla wars in Vietnam and Afghanistan, resistance movements in World War II. The pattern is always the same, a technologically inferior force defeats a superior enemy by refusing to fight according to the enemy's rules. Ambassador Price made one final attempt at negotiation, but the coalition remained inflexible. Their representatives seemed genuinely puzzled by human reluctance to accept guided civilization. To them, the choice was obvious: submit to superior beings or be destroyed. They can't understand why we won't just surrender, Helen reported after her last meeting. The concept of fighting against hopeless odds is alien to them. They expect rational beings to submit when faced with superior force. The day before the first battle, Roy addressed the volunteer crews via encrypted communication. You're about to participate in the most important deception in human history. The coalition thinks they're teaching primitive humans a lesson about modern warfare. Instead, they're giving us a masterclass in their weaknesses. As the human ships prepared to depart for the Kepler system, Roy felt the weight of the entire species' future on his shoulders. If the deception protocol failed, humanity would face extinction. If it succeeded, the galaxy was about to learn that humans had been studying war for thousands of years. While other species played at being civilized, the coalition was about to discover that honor and fairness were luxuries that only the victorious could afford. The USS Liberty drifted in space near the asteroid mining station, her hull blackened and torn open in 3 places. Captain Nick Turner's last transmission had been cut short when a coalition energy beam punched through the bridge. The 23 crew members aboard were dead, but their sacrifice had not been wasted. General Roy Adams reviewed the battle recordings in his command bunker deep beneath Colorado. The data was everything he had hoped for and more. The coalition ships had performed exactly as predicted, following their ancient protocols with mathematical precision. Show me the Valkyrian targeting sequence again, Roy said to his intelligence team. The holographic display replayed the moment when Admiral Zethkar's flagship had destroyed the Liberty. The alien ship had announced its attack, waited for the human vessel to turn and face it properly, then fired a single devastating shot. It was beautiful, precise, and completely predictable. They waited 43 seconds between targeting and firing, reported Major Chris Hayes, the intelligence officer who had been analyzing coalition tactics. Every shot followed the same pattern: target, announce, pause for honor, fire. To assess damage. What about their defensive systems? Even more predictable, sir. Their shields operate in rotating frequencies. But they broadcast the sequence openly so enemy ships can match their energy signatures for proper dueling. They're actually helping their opponents shoot them. Roy shook his head in amazement. The coalition had turned warfare into a dance where both partners knew all the steps. It was honorable, artistic, and suicidal against an enemy who didn't care about the choreography. The second battle had gone similarly. Captain Diana Ross and the USS Independence had lasted longer than the Liberty, but the outcome was the same. The coalition destroyer had followed its protocols perfectly, giving the human ship multiple opportunities to surrender with honor before delivering the final blow, but each defeat provided more intelligence. Human recording devices, disguised as standard ship systems, had captured detailed scans of coalition technology. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they hadn't even attempted to jam human sensors. The most important discovery is their command structure, Chris continued. Coalition fleets operate on a strict hierarchy. Captains cannot make independent decisions without approval from their admiral, and admirals cannot change tactics without authorization from the Coalition Council, so they can't adapt quickly. To new situations? Worse than that, sir. They can't adapt at all without committee approval. I watched 3 battles where coalition forces could have easily won by changing their approach, but they stuck to standard procedures instead. Roy felt a grim smile cross his face. The coalition had spent thousands of years perfecting a system that eliminated the chaos and unpredictability of war. They had also eliminated the flexibility that made victory possible against a clever enemy. Meanwhile, on the border world of New Austin, the coalition occupation was not going as smoothly as Admiral Zefkar had expected. The human colonists had surrendered properly when his forces arrived, but they continued to cause problems that weren't covered in occupation protocols. Sheriff Tony Blake had officially turned in his badge and weapons when the coalition demanded surrender. What he hadn't mentioned was that every colonist on New Austin owned multiple firearms that weren't registered with any government. The aliens had confiscated official weapons while leaving thousands of hunting rifles, pistols, and shotguns in civilian hands. Dr. Maria Santos, the colony's chief medical officer, had volunteered to help treat wounded coalition soldiers. The aliens appreciated this gesture of cooperation and gave her access to their medical facilities. They didn't realize she was mapping their base layouts and identifying weak points in their security. The problem is that they don't understand. Guerrilla warfare, Tony explained to his resistance cell during a meeting in the abandoned mine shaft outside town. Their manual probably has procedures for dealing with rebel armies, but not for handling farmers who shoot at them from their own barns. The coalition had tried to establish proper military governance over New Austin, but human behavior kept confusing their protocols. When coalition forces patrolled the streets, colonists would smile and wave, then disappear into buildings. Supply convoys found roads blocked by fallen trees that seemed to be natural accidents. Communication equipment suffered mysterious failures that always seemed to happen during important transmissions. Commander Vextile of the coalition occupation force had requested guidance from his superiors about dealing with these irregularities. The response had been to follow standard procedures for pacifying primitive populations. But the standard procedures assumed that conquered species would either submit completely or rebel openly. Not this strange mixture of cooperation and sabotage. Back on Earth, General Adams was preparing for the next phase of his deception. The Coalition Council had decided that humans were cowards who would surrender completely after witnessing a few more demonstrations of superior firepower. They were planning a major fleet action to crush human resistance once and for all. "They're bringing 4 battle groups to the Sol system," reported Colonel Amy Torres. 68 ships total, including their newest dreadnoughts. They want to end this war with one overwhelming victory. "Perfect," Roy replied. "The bigger the fleet, the more intelligence we can gather. Are our recording platforms ready?" "Yes, sir. We've hidden sensor arrays throughout the outer system, disguised as space debris. Every move they make will be documented from multiple angles." Dr. Lisa Kane had been studying coalition psychology and had reached disturbing conclusions about their mindset. They genuinely believe they're helping us, she reported. From their perspective, teaching humans proper warfare is a civilizing mission. They think we'll thank them eventually for showing us the right way to fight. What happens? When they realize we've been deceiving them? That's what worries me. Their psychological profiles suggest they have no experience with betrayal. When they discover we've been lying, they might not just get angry, they might have complete mental breakdowns. Roy considered this information carefully. An enemy that became irrational was dangerous in unpredictable ways. But an enemy that couldn't adapt to changing circumstances was still easier to defeat than one that could learn from mistakes. The Coalition's next demonstration battle was scheduled for the asteroid belt near Mars. Human Admiral Ben Clark would command 3 destroyers against a single Coalition battleship, giving the aliens another opportunity to showcase their superior technology and tactics. But this time, the human ships carried more than recording equipment. Hidden in their cargo bays were experimental weapons that Earth scientists had developed specifically for fighting Coalition forces. Kinetic projectiles that could punch through energy shields, explosive missiles that detonated in patterns alien computers couldn't predict, and electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt Coalition communications. Remember, Roy told Admiral Clark during the final briefing, you still need to lose this battle, but not before we test our new weapons. The Coalition needs to see that we're following their rules while we gather data about their responses to unexpected tactics. What if the new weapons work too well? What if we accidentally win? Then we learn something valuable about their weaknesses. But don't count on it. 1 battleship against 3 destroyers should still favor them, even with our surprises. As the human fleet prepared for departure, Roy felt the weight of command pressing down on him. Each battle brought humanity closer to understanding their enemy, but it also cost lives. The crew members volunteering for these missions knew they were probably flying to their deaths, but they also understood that their sacrifice might save their species. The Coalition was growing more confident with each victory, exactly as Roy had hoped. They were so certain of human inferiority that they had stopped taking basic precautions. Their ships approached battles with shields at minimum power. Their crews were relaxed and careless, and their admirals were more concerned with following proper form than with actual fighting. Soon, Roy thought, it would be time to show the galaxy what humans had really learned during their centuries of warfare. The Coalition believed they were teaching primitive beings how to fight civilized wars. Instead, they were about to discover that civilization was a luxury that only the survivors could afford. The moment General Roy Adams had been waiting for arrived 6 months after the first Coalition victory. Operation Chaos Storm began at exactly 0300 Standard Time, when human forces across 12 star systems dropped all pretense of following the Codex of Honorable Combat. Commander Luke Peterson guided his stealth squadron through the asteroid field around Proxima Station, their ships running completely silent. The Coalition supply depot ahead of them was protected by 6 patrol vessels, but the alien crews were relaxed and confident. They had been expecting another formal challenge, announced hours in advance with proper ceremonial protocols. Instead, they got 12 torpedoes fired from point-blank range by ships they couldn't see coming. "Target the command vessel first," Luke whispered into his communicator, though silence wasn't necessary in space. His crew had been practicing this attack for months, using captured Coalition recordings to map every weakness in their defensive patterns. The alien ships were arranged in their standard geometric formation, each vessel positioned to provide maximum visual impact. They looked magnificent against the stars, but they were sitting targets for anyone who didn't care about fighting fair. The first torpedo struck the Coalition command ship before its shields could fully activate. The second and third punched through the hull while confused alien officers tried to understand where the attack was coming from. By the time the Coalition crews realized they were under assault, half their fleet was already crippled. Unknown vessels, identify yourselves and prepare for honorable combat, came the desperate transmission from the surviving Coalition ships. Luke didn't respond. His squadron was already accelerating away, having completed their mission in less than 3 minutes. The aliens would spend hours trying to reorganize and follow proper pursuit protocols while the humans disappeared into hyperspace. Meanwhile, in the Kepler system, Captain Grace Miller was demonstrating why humans had spent centuries studying orbital mechanics. Her destroyer squadron was using Jupiter's massive gravity well to slingshot around the gas giant at impossible velocities, approaching the Coalition fleet from an angle that their tactical computers couldn't predict. Admiral Crintle of the Aquatic Depths Empire watched in growing confusion as human ships appeared on sensors traveling at speeds that should have been impossible. The Coalition fleet was arranged in perfect battle formation, ready for the traditional long-range energy weapon duel that had defined galactic warfare for millennia. "How are they moving like that?" demanded the Admiral's tactical officer, a crystalline being whose thoughts moved through harmonic resonance. "Our computers show they should have been destroyed by gravitational forces." "Probably a sensor malfunction," Admiral Crintle replied. "Primitive species often use crude jamming devices. Maintain formation and prepare for proper combat once they approach at reasonable range." The Coalition ships waited patiently for the humans to slow down and arrange themselves for single combat. Instead, Grace Miller's squadron screamed past them at incredible velocity, launching kinetic projectiles that struck the alien vessels. Before their crews could react, the heavy metal slugs punched through Coalition shields like they weren't there. The alien defensive systems had been designed to stop energy weapons, not solid projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed. 3 Coalition ships were destroyed before their computers finished calculating what had hit them. "Impossible," Admiral Crintle gasped as his flagship shuddered under impact. "They're using primitive kinetic weapons. Our shields should stop anything so crude." But the shields didn't stop them because Coalition technology had evolved beyond such simple defensive measures. Their energy barriers could deflect plasma beams and particle streams, but they had no effect on old-fashioned hunks of metal moving really fast on the surface of New Austin. Sergeant Paul Warren was leading human Marines in their first night operation against Coalition ground forces. The aliens had set up their base according to standard military principles, with clear fields of fire, proper defensive positions, and adequate lighting for normal combat operations. They had not planned for enemies who could see in the dark and preferred fighting when their opponents couldn't see them. "Remember, we're not trying to win this battle," Paul whispered to his squad as they moved through the forest surrounding the Coalition base. "We're trying to make them afraid of the dark." Corporal Nancy Green had painted her face with mud and wrapped strips of cloth around her equipment to eliminate noise and reflection. She looked like something from humanity's primitive past, but she carried weapons that could penetrate Coalition armor. The combination of ancient camouflage techniques and modern firepower was something the aliens had no defense against. The first Coalition sentry never saw what killed him. One moment he was standing at his post, confident in his superior technology and training. The next moment he was dead, taken down by a human who had crawled within arm's reach without triggering any sensors. The second sentry found his partner's body and immediately activated the alarm system, following proper security protocols. Lights flooded the base perimeter, and Coalition forces began organizing their response according to standard procedures for dealing with ground attacks. But there was no massed assault coming. Instead, individual shots began picking off alien soldiers from the darkness beyond the lights. Every time Coalition forces organized to respond to one position, the shots came from somewhere else. Their thermal sensors couldn't lock onto targets that knew how to mask their heat signatures, and their motion detectors were useless against enemies who knew how to move without being seen. "Where are they?" demanded the Coalition base commander, a tall insectoid whose compound eyes should have been able to spot movement in multiple directions simultaneously. "Our sensors show nothing, but our people keep dying." The answer was that humans were everywhere and nowhere, using terrain that Coalition tactical doctrine said was impossible to hide in. They fired from positions that military textbooks claimed couldn't provide adequate cover. They moved through areas that should have been impassable for infantry. Most importantly, They fought without following any of the rules that made galactic warfare predictable and civilized. The psychological impact was devastating. Coalition soldiers were trained to fight against enemies who announced their presence and intentions. They expected battle lines, clear objectives, and honorable combat between recognized military forces. Instead, they faced an invisible enemy that killed from the shadows and disappeared before any response was possible. But the most shocking development came when Ryan Kim and his cyber warfare team penetrated Coalition communication networks. The young tech officer had been studying alien computer systems for months, looking for weaknesses that human hackers could exploit. Their network security is incredible, Ryan reported to General Adams via encrypted transmission. But it's designed to prevent unauthorized access, not to stop authorized users from doing unauthorized things. Explain that. They don't have passwords or security clearances like we do. Their system identifies users by biological signatures and assumes that anyone who can access the network has permission to do whatever they want. They've never considered the possibility that enemies might hack into their systems. Ryan's team had used captured Coalition equipment to create false biological signatures, essentially impersonating alien officers in the computer network. Once inside, they found that Coalition military databases were completely open to anyone, with proper identification codes. I can read their fleet movements, supply schedules, tactical plans, everything, Ryan continued. They're not hiding anything because they never imagined enemies might be able to see their private communications. The intelligence breakthrough gave human forces an overwhelming advantage. Every Coalition fleet movement was known in advance. Every supply convoy was vulnerable to attack. Every military base had its defensive plans compromised before battles even began. General Adams reviewed the reports from all fronts with growing amazement. In 6 hours of real warfare, human forces had accomplished more than 6 months of honorable combat. Coalition fleets were scattered and demoralized. Their ground forces were paralyzed by fear, and their communication networks were completely compromised. But the most important victory was psychological. For the first time in galactic history, Coalition forces were facing an enemy that refused to fight by established rules. Their tactical doctrines, refined over thousands of years, were useless against opponents who treated war as a survival struggle rather than an artistic endeavor. Admiral Zethkar's final transmission of the day was intercepted by human intelligence. His voice carried a tone that Roy had never heard from any Coalition officer: uncertainty. Council Command, we are facing unprecedented tactical situations. Human forces are employing methods not covered in any military manual. Request immediate guidance on how to respond to enemies who fight without honor. Roy smiled grimly as he reviewed the day's results. The Coalition was about to learn that honor was something only winners could afford to worry about. The Judgment Fleet of the Ethereal Dominion emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Terra Nova system like a metal storm cloud. 300 Coalition ships arranged themselves in the most magnificent battle formation in galactic history, their hulls gleaming with energy patterns that could be seen from 3 light minutes away. Coalition Supreme Admiral Vorthak stood on the bridge of the massive flagship Eternal Glory, watching his sensors for signs of the human fleet. According to all intelligence reports, humanity had gathered their remaining forces here for a final desperate stand. It would be the last battle of a very short war. Magnificent, whispered his tactical officer, a gaseous being whose thoughts manifested as colored lights in the bridge atmosphere. The humans will witness the full power of civilized warfare before they surrender. Perhaps they will finally understand what they have been fighting against. Admiral Vorthak felt confident about the coming battle. Human forces had been causing trouble with their crude tactics and dishonorable methods, but they had never faced the combined might of the entire Coalition. This fleet represented every major species in the galaxy, working together to restore proper order to space. What the Admiral didn't know was that the Terra Nova system was empty except for automated beacon transmitters broadcasting false sensor readings. The real human fleet was scattered across a dozen Coalition homeworlds, preparing to demonstrate the final lesson in human warfare: General Roy Adams watched the coalition deployment from his command bunker on Earth, studying the enemy formation through long-range sensors. The aliens had arranged their ships in perfect geometric patterns that looked beautiful and intimidating. They had also positioned themselves exactly where human battle computers had predicted they would. They're following the same pattern they've used for 1,000 years, observed Admiral Claire Foster, who had been given command of the largest human strike force. Flagship in the center, heavy cruisers in supporting positions, destroyers arranged for maximum visual impact. They might as well have sent us their battle plans. That's exactly what they did, replied Ryan Kim from his cyber warfare station. I've been reading their communications for weeks. They're so confident in their superiority that they didn't bother encrypting their deployment orders. Roy turned to the main display showing coalition territory. Red dots marked enemy homeworlds, now defended by skeleton forces while their main fleets chased shadows in empty space. Blue arrows showed human strike groups moving toward targets that had been left nearly defenseless. Execute Operation Checkmate, Roy ordered, across coalition space. Human fleets appeared in systems that had been peaceful for centuries. These worlds had never experienced real warfare because the coalition's rigid military doctrine made such attacks unthinkable. Civilized species fought each other's military forces, not civilian populations and industrial centers. Captain Steve Rogers led the assault on Valkyrie Prime, the coalition capital world. His small fleet of destroyers dropped out of hyperspace directly above the planet's main shipbuilding facilities, ignoring the scattered patrol vessels that scrambled to intercept them. The Valkyrian defense forces tried to organize a proper response, sending formal challenges and requesting that human forces arrange themselves for honorable combat. Instead, they received kinetic bombardment that destroyed 3 orbital construction yards before the alien commanders finished reading their tactical manuals. "This is Admiral Zethkar of the Home Defense Fleet," came a desperate transmission. "You are attacking civilian targets in violation of all galactic law. Withdraw immediately and we will arrange proper military engagement." Steve ignored the communication and continued his attack. Human forces had studied coalition psychology for months and understood exactly how the aliens would react to this situation. They would be shocked, confused, and unable to adapt quickly enough to mount an effective defense. Meanwhile, Captain Linda Parker was demonstrating human siege tactics against the Thexani Collective's main military academy on Hiveworld 7. The insectoid species had concentrated their best officers and strategists at this facility, believing it was safely protected by distance from any possible battlefield. Linda's squadron used the planet's own communication satellites to coordinate their attack, having gained access through Ryan Kim's cyber warfare operations. The Thexani found their own defensive systems turned against them as human forces used captured command codes to shut down orbital platforms and redirect automated defenses. "How are they controlling our networks?" demanded Hivemind coordinator Vrex, watching helplessly as human ships destroyed military targets with precision that should have been impossible. "Our systems require biological authentication from authorized personnel." The answer was that humans had learned to fake biological signatures months ago, but coalition security doctrine had never considered this possibility. Their computer networks had no defense against enemies who used deception as a primary weapon. Back in the Terra Nova system, Supreme Admiral Vorthak was growing increasingly frustrated. His massive fleet had been waiting for hours, but no human forces had appeared to accept his challenge. Long-range sensors showed no enemy ships within light hours of his position. "Perhaps they are too frightened to face us," suggested his communications officer. "Primitive species often flee when confronted with overwhelming force." But Admiral Vorthak was beginning to suspect something else was happening. Emergency transmissions were coming in from coalition worlds across the galaxy, reporting surprise attacks by human forces. The reports made no sense according to standard military doctrine, but they were becoming too numerous to ignore. "Sir," called the sensor operator, "we're receiving a transmission from Valkyrie Prime. Human forces are attacking the capital shipyards. Impossible, Vorthak replied automatically. Human military doctrine shows they concentrate their forces for defensive battles. They cannot be in multiple locations simultaneously. But the reports kept coming. Human attacks on crystalline resonance mining worlds, raids against aquatic depth supply bases, strikes on manufacturing centers throughout coalition territory. It was as if the entire human fleet had divided into small groups and attacked everywhere. At once, the truth was even worse than Admiral Vorthak imagined. Human forces weren't just attacking military targets randomly. They were systematically destroying the industrial infrastructure that kept coalition fleets supplied and operational. Without fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, even the mighty Judgment fleet would become helpless. General Adams watched the battle reports with grim satisfaction. Coalition forces were reacting exactly as human psychologists had predicted. Faced with attacks that violated every rule of civilized warfare, alien commanders were paralyzed by their inability to respond according to established protocols. Their whole military system is designed around the assumption that enemies will fight the same way they do, observed Dr. Lisa Kane. When faced with opponents who ignore their rules, they literally don't know what to do. The psychological breakdown was spreading throughout coalition command structure. Officers who had spent their careers following rigid procedures found themselves dealing with situations that weren't covered in any manual. Many simply shut down, unable to function without clear guidelines. Admiral Vorthak's final moment of understanding came when his flagship received a direct transmission from General Adams himself. The human commander appeared on the main screen, speaking from his bunker on Earth. "Admiral," Roy said calmly, "your fleet is magnificent and your tactics are perfect. Unfortunately, you're fighting the wrong battle in the wrong place against the wrong enemy." "What do you mean?" Vorthak demanded. "You came here expecting to fight other coalition forces that follow your rules and respect your traditions. Instead, you're fighting humans who learned warfare from 10,000 years of killing each other. We don't care about honor or proper procedures, we care about winning." The transmission ended, leaving Vorthak staring at a blank screen while emergency reports flooded in from across coalition territory. Human forces had struck at the heart of galactic civilization while the defenders were arranged in pretty formations waiting for a battle that would never come. The coalition surrendered 3 days later, not because their military forces were defeated, but because their entire command structure had collapsed under the weight of fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Thousands of years of military tradition proved useless against opponents who treated war as a problem to be solved, rather than an art form to be perfected. In his final report, General Adams wrote that the victory had been inevitable from the moment of first contact. The coalition had evolved beyond practical warfare, creating a civilization so dependent on rules and honor that they couldn't adapt when faced with chaos and deception. Humanity had never had that luxury. 10,000 years of fighting each other had taught humans that the only rule in war was survival, and the only honor was victory. The galaxy had learned too late that when civilized beings fight savages, civilization doesn't always win.